All right, y'all. Today's video is for those of you who are stuck in task paralysis. I've covered this in a number of different ways over the last 3 years, but I want to come at it from a bit of a different perspective today. So I'm going to respond to a listener question because I think it's true for all of us. And the context of the listener's question is business, but this relates to cleaning out the garage or moving house or doing taxes or anything like that. Okay. So here's what the listener wrote. She says she's struggling to focus on tasks that will move her business forward versus getting stuck in paralysis. She thinks it might have something to do with fear because she's scared to be successful, but also she's not breaking her task down enough because she'll have a list that she stares at for weeks and weeks at a time, but nothing ever seems to get done. And I can so relate to that, even though she says she wants to do this so badly, but she can't get herself to start. And she ends off her comment by saying, if you can solve this for me, I will be a millionaire, but more importantly, I will feel successful. So in this viewer's question, which I'm sure a lot of you can relate to, there are 3 main things that I want to break down. And again, it's going to relate to anything that you might be dragging your feet on. Number 1 is getting very clear on what it is you want and why, and understanding what the next best action is to take in order to get there. Number 2 is understanding what's behind your struggle to initiate tasks and how to get around it in terms of your own unique brain wiring. And number 3 is digging into that fear of success, because if you truly fear success, no matter how well you do with issue number 1 and issue number 2, you will always struggle to get where you want to go because you're terrified to get there. So let's get into it. But before we do, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Kara McGill. I'm an ADHD coach and creator, and I'm here for the busy, ambitious brains who want to do all the things, but they're stuck in task paralysis until today. So let's get into it. All right, let's break down each of those 3 elements I just shared, starting with number 1, getting super clear on what it is you want and why and what the next best action is. And again, this can relate to anything you're holding yourself back on, but let's use the context of business because that's what's come up in this question. Now, when people say, I want to be an entrepreneur, that is about them. Starting a business is something entirely different. So very often in my coaching practice, if I'm working with a new entrepreneur, they have an idea in their head of what entrepreneurship will be like, because that's what we see in social media, right? Like it's living the dream, having your own schedule, and it's all hunky-dory. But that is a very internal focus, and it puts a lot of pressure on you, and it's also not helpful when you're starting a business. Instead, what we want to do is flip your focus around so that you're focused on the business that you're going to start, which might sound captain obvious, but think about it this way. When you are thinking about being an entrepreneur, are you focused on the benefits it's going to give you, or are you focused on the audience you want to serve, the problem that they have, and the way you're going to solve that problem, which is basically, bottom line, the 3 things any entrepreneur needs in order to start a viable business. But when we don't have those things or we're not focused on them, we have a tendency to spin. And very often the why of why we want to start a business is because we want that feeling of freedom that entrepreneurship apparently gives us, instead of, I want to solve a problem for a specific audience with this specific solution. So that is what I'm talking about in terms of clarity around what it is you want and why. And very often when we're starting a business for the first time, we might have an idea of who we want to serve and how we want to serve them. But because we've never started a business before, it's really hard to have that level of clarity that we might need in order to have that next best step. The other piece of this is the why. So I mentioned with this person, they might be focused on how their business is going to benefit them rather than focusing on how this business is going to benefit a specific audience. And when you're only focused on that, it gets really hard to take the next step forward when it's uncomfortable, because you're doing this from a place of, I want to start a business to benefit myself. So every time I try to do something new or scary, it's really uncomfortable and my nervous system doesn't want to do it. Whereas if you're starting a business because you're really passionate about this solution, you don't mind getting a little uncomfortable because you're doing it in service of a bigger why, rather than I'm doing this to create this beautiful life of freedom that I want for myself. And I'm not trying to pick on anyone because I was definitely in that same boat, and entrepreneurship gets glorified a lot of the times. So if you are finding that it's too uncomfortable for you to move forward, you're probably probably not focusing on the impact you want to have. You might just be focusing on the impact it's going to have on your specific life. And the beautiful thing of getting clear on what you want and why is that it makes the next best action pretty obvious, or at least a lot more clear. So you're not just spitting on this idea of something you want to do, but having no idea where to start. And that, of course, takes us beautifully into the next step I want to make about initiating tasks. If you have ADHD, it could be that you have a set of tasks that you want to do and you're very clear on them, but when you sit down, there is not enough dopamine in your prefrontal cortex for you to actually get started on the thing. It's much like wanting to jump in the car and go somewhere, but you notice that you're out of gas. You're not going to get very far with no gas in the tank. So the question for you as an ADHDer is, how can you create dopamine for yourself in your life? And that starts with building self-awareness around when you feel at your sharpest and when you don't feel on your sharpest. Are you a morning person, afternoon, or evening person, for example? Within those moments where you feel your sharpest, there's always clues about why you feel that way. Is it in the morning after you've just had coffee? Is it in the afternoon when you just did a workout or went for a walk? Or is it in the evening after all of your distractions are gone to bed and you can focus on the task at hand? So think about when you are at your most sharp and what the circumstances are that feed into that. And that's going to give you an idea of how you can start to manage your own dopamine levels. Some people call it a dopa menu, where you have a list of things that you know will zhuzh up your brain and get it started enough for you to take action. So again, that is something that's going to look very different for everyone. For me personally, I know I'm at my sharpest around late morning and mid-afternoon when I have worked out, been outside, caffeinated, and medicated myself, and I'm ready to roll. Those are the things that get my dopamine going. Wearing comfortable clothes also helps, and not having distractions around me is essential, but that's my dopamine menu. Got to figure out what yours is. And then there's one other question that the viewer astutely points out here that I want to address. She says she has a list of tasks, but they seem to go from week to week to week and never get done. And she does also mention that she's probably not breaking them down enough. I have a sneaking suspicion if I were to look at this woman's task list, it might say on it, Wednesday, work on business, Thursday, figure out niche. And the thing is, those are not tasks. They are random thoughts that you've put down on paper, but they are completely non-actionable. So it's really important that when you sit down and you've got your dopamine going, that you are very clear on the actions you need to take, or else you will just find something else to do. Because trying to figure it out in the moment is not interesting or helpful, and you will probably just punt these tasks because they're also not urgent, right? Now let's cover the last thing you mentioned, which is fear of success. And this is a really important one, because if you nail, the first two things I talked about, but you're too afraid to move forward because of this fear of success, then you're going to stay exactly where you are. You're not going to go anywhere. So let's address that now, first by clarifying what exactly does success look like for you. So in the context of this business you want to start, what does the first 30, 60, and 90 days look like in terms of success? What does the first year look like? And when you think out that far, be very clear about what it is exactly that you are afraid of, because it can be rooted in something from your past, or it can just be a limiting belief that you're not going to be good at something and you're going to get to a point in your business and it's going to be a giant public failure and you'll never be able to forgive yourself. Very often, those things are not the case, but the only way you're ever going to find out whether or not you can get over those hurdles is to actually get there through action. You can't think your way out of this. One thing you can do is give yourself small exposure to whatever it is you're afraid of. Like if you're afraid of selling, how can you expose yourself to the act of selling in a very small way that doesn't feel overwhelming or terrifying? I will tell you, in my own experience, the things that I was terrified about when I first started my coaching business was just being in the presence of somebody and coaching them and making sure that I was saying the right thing, or I didn't say the wrong thing, or I was listening for the right thing. So I drastically undercharged for the first year of my coaching practice just to make sure I got the reps in and the amount of exposure I needed to build confidence. I would never have been able to think my way through that experience. I had to act my way through it. And that is true of anything in life that we are afraid to go after when it is something we truly want to do. So let's wrap this up with a few helpful takeaways. Number one, whatever it is you want to do that you feel like you're in paralysis around, be very clear about what it is exactly you're looking for in terms of an outcome outcome and why you want it. How is it going to benefit you? How is it going to be uncomfortable? And why is it going to be okay to move forward anyway? The next thing you want to do is address your task paralysis. Like I said, if you're someone with low dopamine, you want to look for ways that you can increase dopamine when you need it the most. And number three, get very clear about this perceived fear of success. What does success look like? Exactly. And what is so scary about it? And whatever it is that you fear, how can you give yourself micro doses of exposure to it to build up your confidence to know that you can at least try the thing, probably fail 6 or 7 times, but get up and do it again and again until you get it right. So I hope those points were helpful for anyone struggling to do something they really want to do, but feeling like they're stuck in paralysis. Whether you have ADHD or not, all of these same rules apply. So thanks very much for listening to the end. I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.